me something, Uncle Money?
Hi guys, doing today? We have another episode of Building Wealth and Mental Health, and we have a special guest, Dr. Rivers. She comes from a unique background. She spent a lot of her time in education. Now she has her own practice. So she's going to give you experience both in academia and also out on her own. So I think her experience is going to be really valuable to the listeners. So welcome today.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So can you please give a little bit about who you are, the clients you serve, and what does your practice look like today?
So, I would describe myself as a clinical psychologist in private practice. I have my practice in the Vinings area near Cumberland Mall. Those of you in Cobb County, I'm sure, are familiar with that area. And I would describe my practice mainly focusing on people who come to me with issues of trauma and abuse, areas of stress, worry, and I also focus a lot on when I do assessments of my clients on areas of racial trauma as well. So racial identity, issues of being microaggressions, that sort of thing. I would say I look at your childhood and I help my clients to unpack that and help them understand how the things that they learned in their childhood, particularly for those who experienced trauma, are operating today and in ways that may not be the healthiest. And so it may show up in their relationships, it may show up in the workplace, friendships. So across the board, we are shaped by our earlier experiences. And I really focus on helping clients, as I said, unpack that, look at it, take what works, throw away what doesn't work. And that obviously is a process. It doesn't happen just in the one session, but so that's kind of what I do.
Very good. So I think that's a great segue. We're going to go a little bit about, your childhood. Kind of explain who you were before high school and how did that set you up to what you do today?
So who I was before high school, I would say I was someone who was just a kid who I had a good upbringing, great parents. My father was in the military. He worked for IBM for a while too. Now, going back to his time in the military, he flew, uh, I don't know if it's called jets. My nephew's a pilot, so he's always corrected me on what type of plane it was. But it's basically those planes who that carried the nuclear bombs. And he was a navigator in the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
So he had a lot of experience in that area and eventually moved out of that, started working for IBM. Mom was a stay-at-home mom. She did work, so I was very blessed to have that. She was that mother that was home after school and, would cook dinner and would discipline. She wasn't afraid to use the belt if necessary. So she was just that consistent presence.
Mhm.
So again, I was blessed to have that, and but I grew up mainly in predominantly white spaces. So that shaped me a great deal because I only really got connected to my culture when I would go home for uh, family reunions. Home, when I say home, my mom's home in the South. She was in Arkansas, or my father's family was in California, and I would be embraced by that family. So I would be able to understand more about my culture then, but for the most part, it was predominantly white schools, white neighborhoods. Back in those days, it was coming off of the civil rights movement. A lot of Black people felt like to be a success, that's what you had to do. You had to, buy in a white neighborhood, put your kids in white schools. And so my parents were no different.
Yeah, I
So,
think, yeah, just to segue a little bit, you said, and I had the privilege that my mom was able to stay at home for 5 years to help me and my brothers. How do you contrast the dynamics today as far as the clients that you serve, a lot of ladies that you serve, and they're kind of juggling work and life and how that affects their upbringing of children?
so the balance you're saying?
That's correct.
Yeah. I would say actually, to be clear, most of my demographics are single
Mm,
and with no children.
wow.
The women, though, that are married and the women that have children that I do see, it's tough.
Mhm.
It's really tough. It is a juggling act as it relates to parenting, uh, being a spouse, and it's lots of stress that comes from that. Am I doing this right? Uh,
Mhm.
my child, maybe for someone who has older kids, just yelled at me, said they hate me, questioning, lots of self-doubt around it. Have to take this meeting and my child has a basketball game and I can't be there. Guilt. So lots of emotions around.
Gotcha. All right. So, when were you first exposed to the world of mental health, and what was that like for you?
I would say first exposed as it relates to just my own curiosity, my interest in why do people do things, human behavior,
Mhm.
and just wanting to know more about that. So my exposure probably would be just people, just interest in them, interest in uh, how they tick.
Yeah.
I was an undergrad psychology major, again, because I had that interest. And as I would take the courses and learn about, um, again, human behavior, or I would learn about things like experimental psychology and doing experiments and research, it just validated this idea that people are interesting.
Mhm.
Then add in the layer of just desiring to help, just desiring to serve. That's really important to me as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that going through college, it takes a lot of family support, especially if you're going for an advanced degree, a master's, or a doctorate. Explain the support that you received and maybe sprinkle in some, what type of things parents should be thinking about if you have a child wanting to get an advanced degree.
All types of support are so important. I received just unconditional love from my parents. And I remember my mother told me, I might have been 8 years old, and she said, I asked, are you all going to be able to get me to college? I really want to go to college. She's like, you're 8. Like, why are you worrying about this? But yeah, it was never a question like that I had that support. Whatever I wanted to do, even if my dreams were a little odd or weird. I went to Loyola University Chicago to get my doctorate. And I'll never forget, it was me and my really good, again, speaking of support, BFF, ride or die girlfriend, in a U-Haul driving from Atlanta to Chicago, 11 hours with my stuff. And my parents are looking at me like, what are you doing?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
they never questioned. It was always a support. If I needed money, I could call and say, hey, could you send me $100, And I would get 500,
Yeah.
So the idea of support, my parents were there. I mentioned my friend. I have just a wonderful village of women who are all doing really great things. Just they're cheerleaders.
Mhm.
And I don't think I could do it without them.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, when you're going for an advanced degree, it takes a lot of time and sacrifice, and sometimes that's a sacrifice of personal relationships, not only friendships, but also romantic relationships. Any guidance you would give somebody thinking about, hey, I want an advanced degree, but I also want to be partnered with somebody? How do you recommend somebody doing that balancing act?
Well, it's tough. I know for sure when you are married and trying to get a PhD or advanced degree, it can be a challenge. As we mentioned before, just that balancing.
Mhm.
I guess I'm of the mind like it doesn't necessarily have to be a binary choice.
Yeah.
If you have a person who is in your life who is supportive, who can be there for you, go ahead and go for it. In terms of do both. Uh, but I do think, though, that for some, they have to focus on just the work. And I'll just speak to being in a doctoral program. It consumes you. It's all of your energy, all of your time is focused on that. It's almost like, and I don't want to minimize or even compare the military to being in graduate school at all, but I know I've talked to people who've been in the military, say like um, it's like their family. The people, the fellow soldiers are like their family. In a lot of ways, your cohort becomes like your family. You're with them a lot. They're the only ones who know what you're going through. So I don't know if I'm answering your question too well, but I don't necessarily see it as a like one or the other that you choose. I think it depends really on your situation.
Understood. And I think that's probably the correct answer. Different people's times and different lives and relationships they already come into the situation with. So, how did you decide on which doctoral program to select? There's a lot of different programs. You mentioned that you got into a U-Haul with your friends, so you went a little bit further than where you originally were located.
Yes.
How did you think about picking a doctoral program?
Well, I knew I wanted something when I first started. I looked at clinical psychology as well as counseling psychology. My doctorate is in counseling psychology. And one of the things that okay. So the factors that I considered, one was I wanted to have a different experience, a city experience. So that's why I chose Chicago. Been in Atlanta most of my life. I wanted to just find something different. I was 29 years old and I just wanted to have that experience before settling down.
Mhm.
So that was that. Also, money, was just realistically was a factor. Did this particular program have money to give me? And then the actual program itself. One thing about counseling psychology, they come from very much a wellness model versus a sick model. So you look at the patient's or client's strengths versus seeing them as sort of flawed that we come in and fix. And I really like that.
There are two things that you harp on that we think about in the finance world is go who gives you the most money, where you're most desired. Um, who gave you that idea? And also the second question is you spoke on how the college practices or thinks about educating. How did you get that knowledge to begin with?
The things about educating.
Yeah, how they because they took it from that the person's well versus the person's sick. So how did you know
Oh,
that the college that you went to was thinking that way to help
mhm.
other people figure out where they want to go?
I just researched it.
Hmm.
And so I mentioned wanting a different experience, like a city experiences. So I knew I was going to go to Chicago.
Hmm.
So that helped, There's only certain programs there to apply. So I just had to look at those programs. I also applied to a program here in Atlanta just in case I didn't get picked there. So that really was it. Just I did my reading and my research. And to your question, I imagine you would need to really know your values and what they are and what's important to you. So I knew that ahead of time going in. And I forgot what was your other question?
The first question was considering, how much financial aid they give students. So every student is going to give a different package based off their background and what the college is looking for. How did you know that, hey, that's something I should be assessing in my search for a doctoral program?
One of the things I knew was we mentioned before the balance between being in a program and relationships. I knew I would not be able to work full time. Again, going into a doctoral program. So I had to find some place that would offer money to live. And I also knew I would have to get some financial aid, some type of aid. And that was the main focus was I wanted to go in full, just headlong into experiencing all of it and not have to split my time and my brain between, oh, I got to show up at work at 8 and then I got this class. It's it was a model back then. I know a lot of models now are very much open to people who are working. And I think that's good.
And how was Chicago? What was the city like for you at that time? Did it provide you what you were looking for? Explain Chicago and potentially contrast it with Atlanta.
Don't even get me started on Chicago. It's like the best city. Oh, I love it. It's too cold though. That's why I'm back. That's why I'm back in Atlanta. It's too cold. Put that aside, and the experience was just awesome. It was the city that I was looking for, that city experience. I lived first, not too far from the campus, and actually, I'll just say in Rogers Park. So Rogers Park was I guess a quote unquote suburb, but it was still very much part of the city. The food, you know, hands down the best food ever. Maybe New York City has better food, but uh, And I think about it now, just walk out of your apartment, go to like a little restaurant and just the best food you ever ate. And it was not expensive. The culture there, the opportunities to connect with just people from a different, I was, although not born in the South, I was born in California, raised in the South, and had, Southern a mother. And so I very much connect with Southern culture, but to go up there and experience Midwestern culture, which is kind of similar there, but just the different ways of looking at the world. It was just probably one of the best experiences of my life.
I like that. So you're in your doctoral program and you know you have to take so many practicums, so many internships. What was your strategy on selecting those and what was the benefit of the ones that you selected?
The strategy was I knew, so I had come from a college university environment. I was working at Kennesaw State University in their counseling center. So I knew I always wanted to build on that. And that would mean continuing to work with areas of like career counseling. Back then, it was the presenting issues were very much more career and academic and more worried well, I like to call folks who are just struggling, but not so much kind of like community mental health, which is kind of how it is now. And I knew I wanted to build on that. So strategically, I got a job working in the career center at Loyola. My pre practicum was at the University Chicago Counseling Center. So again, just building on that. And then I got my pre-doctoral internship at Georgia State. So I knew I just wanted to build on working at universities, and because that's what I had done. Love academic setting. I'm a lifelong learner. I love learning. Right now, I do a lot of, in addition to my practice, I do training with mental health clinicians. So it's just kind of in my DNA. And I had to do a lot of networking because they just leave you on your own. You got to find it by yourself. So with people who are friends in the city who would know people. That's how I was able to get at UFC in the counseling center, and as well as get the job working at the career center at Loyola. So a lot of asking questions. If they had like some sort of open house, or I also joined there was like a graduate student organization for students of color. Joined it. You just have to really know how to do a lot of connecting to be able to find out about the opportunities.
Let's talk about networking. So, networking when you're in college, in doctoral program, when you're doing the practicums, and also as a professional, like how have you thought about networking? Was it something that came naturally to you, just naturally a people person? Did somebody advise you on how to network? How do you think about networking?
I feel like most psychologists don't really like it, um, but it's necessary. I'm by nature an introvert, so I just like deep, meaningful conversations with people. I don't want to just pop in and pop out.
Mhm.
And so it requires energy. That's not my natural energy
Yeah.
to do. Uh, and yeah, people had to instruct me. This is what's important. So one way that that did fit me was I joined professional organizations and I was on committees. I actually am the past president of the Georgia College Counseling Association. So I became the president of that group and met a lot of my colleagues in the state who worked at university counseling centers. So part of it was just joining organizations where you could just naturally meet people. And the other thing is, yes, people would have to say, hey, do this, go here. And you have to, again, if there's any introverts listening right now, they probably totally get it because it's not what we do naturally.
Mhm.
I would want to, I'd meet someone, I'd want to like get to know them. But meanwhile, they're on to the next person. I'm
Right.
like, oh, this is weird. You know? But this is just what you have to do. So as I started doing that and joining organizations, people, if jobs came up, hey, we got this job. Are you interested? Or they would think about me like
Mhm.
Rhonda. So it's necessary, not always easy for everyone, but so important.
So you had a long stint at Kennesaw University, Kennesaw State University. So what was that like? How would you describe your tenure there? What are some of the pros and cons of a psychologist working in academia?
I started at Kennesaw State, so I had different times there. And when it was a much smaller school, and oh man, that was probably my favorite time there because we had like a group of people. We all got to know each other. We had fun together, and it was not even just within the university counseling center, but then across the board, the university across the board. It was a smaller school feel, so it was really, really nice. And honestly, I was not adverse to the growth. The growth was exciting to see. It's still growing.
Mhm.
And so the pros was definitely initially was people who were there who could mentor you, who would take the time to pour into you. In terms of the Black faculty and staff, very strong network there. And I was like one of the younger ones that would come in, that was coming in at that point. And so they kind of took you under their wing and taught you how to do the politics and understand how to deal with things like microaggressions that could occur. I mean, it's just, let's face it, it's just there, it happens. But the the pros were huge,
Mhm.
and cons for me were honestly the pay. That's a big reason why I worked several jobs in addition to my job.
Mhm.
Big reason why I decided in 2009 to leave and start a private practice. Do you just, it's you're paid by the legislature. They make the decisions on the raises. So you're stuck in
Mhm.
a sense.
Yeah, I've always been impressed by the Kennesaw State students, especially in the business program. Do you know what magic pixie dust they sprinkle on the students to get them prepared for the real world? Or it could be how the people they select to bring in.
I don't. I was not as connected to but I do know it's a stellar school.
Yes.
And which a lot of the programs there are really good. I would My nephew went to Kennesaw State. I would encourage others to go. And but honestly, I couldn't answer that question. I'm not really sure, but I do know that it is just the environment there is. I have a football team now. When I was there, they didn't have a football team, so it's become more like a traditional school. Whereas when I was there, it was very much more non-traditional, focused
Yeah.
on, as I mentioned, the older adult student was the one they were looking at.
Mhm. Gotcha. So you're in academia and you're thinking about going out on your own. And you are claiming as an introvert. So, an introvert going out on their own, gaining clients. Before you went out on your own, what was going through your mind at that time to say, this is something I think is a good fit for myself?
It was a process to get there. I'm very risk averse,
Mhm.
but I will take calculated risks.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I put a lot of thought into what is this going to look like? At that time, I was single. I was not married, so it was just me.
Mhm.
So I had to think about things like health insurance. I had to think about retirement. I had to think about what happens if I get sick and I can't work.
Mhm.
All of that stuff was going through my head. What I did was I decided to start part-time
Yeah.
and to build a practice and just see how it goes. I think when we were initially talking about coming together and doing this, I mentioned to you how I would just sit there in uh, my office and I would see 20, 25 clients a week at the school. And I think, I was seeing these folks per how much money would I be making right now? And so that really was a big motivator too. And like, you could do this. And
Mhm.
then I would see other people. I'm a prior athlete. I played sports in school and I was naturally competitive.
Mhm.
So I was like, well, if they could do it, I could do it.
Mhm.
Like, why can't I do it? I'm just as good as they are. So I also had that spirit going for me as well. I would really encourage, yeah, students who are thinking about going on, just look at the people who are out there doing it now, model what they do, talk to them, learn from them, and they can do it, you can do it.
So you've decided this is what I want to do. I think you mentioned, yeah, I have a couple clients on the side that I'm servicing, but I'm
Mhm.
ready to make the jump. What
Mhm.
were the steps that you did? Did you, create your LLC? Did you open up a
Mhm.
business bank account? What were like the technical side of creating a business that you did going out on your own?
So again, I mentioned I had parents who were very helpful. My father actually is an entrepreneur, so he knew about things like you said, creating um, I didn't do an LLC. I did oh, I'm blocking on it.
S Corp?
Yes, thank you. An escort. So I did an escort, and he helped walk me through that. And so talked about that. He agreed to be an officer of my company. So I had that very, very good model and example of how to do that. So I did that. I also thought about, applying for loans
Mm.
to just get my business started. I did not get approved for any. So you needed probably someone like you there to help me work through that one, but everybody turned me down. But again, I had a family support. So my father invested in me and gave me a nice little starter amount so that when I left Kennesaw State and I had two clients and a lot of money for rent. And when I say rent, I mean rent at the job and then my own mortgage.
Mhm.
I had a little bit of money there. So that was really helpful while I was building my practice. I thought about how am I going to get referrals? So I joined a bunch of insurance panels. And although they don't pay well, you get people coming in, and then those people refer people to you. So that's how you grow the business. So I got on a bunch of panels. I got with a group of people who were also doing their own businesses, but were housed together.
Mhm.
So I wasn't all by myself.
Okay.
I think that's really important. I mean, you can do a solo practice, but it's just so much easier to grow your business when you're with other people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was the financial piece, it was the insurance piece, it was how am I going to start this investment in terms of the money and my clientele, who are they? And where am I going to get these referrals?
Let's talk about the group of individuals you decided to almost leave with. I know it's probably separate businesses, but it was almost like y'all were kind of coworkers
Mm.
in a sense. So, how did you select that group? Did they select you, or they already been out for a couple years, and were they a potential referral source in the future?
I don't know if it's possibly both. So the woman who I had been she referred to me and I referred to her, and she's now a really good friend.
Mm.
She and another woman were starting a practice. So she had put out an email, hey, we're looking for people.
Mhm.
I reached out to her. She remembered me from and so I went and I didn't have to interview with them. They set up a model where it wasn't a fee share. It was everyone had their own business
Yeah.
but we're housed together and we'll market together and we'll put ourselves out there on a website, the whole thing.
Nice.
And so, I'm a woman of faith, so I know it was just, God put that in there for me. The timing was right. And that's how it happened.
Okay. So in our world, they say there's riches and niches, and you have a specific niche. How did you select that niche? What was the calling to service that population? What was it like having the mentality of saying, I'm not going to serve everybody, but I'm going to serve this population as best I can?
So again, I think observing yourself is so important to be able to know which way do I want to go.
Mhm.
And I knew, again, counseling because people would just talk to me. And obviously, I realized I'm a good listener. I
Mhm.
also realized when people would share, it would be the folks who would talk about their trauma who I found the most interesting. And so initially, I recognized, hey, this childhood abuse and childhood trauma pieces are really important. And they also are things that I gravitate towards. I also did other things that I realized not me. For example, like couples and family therapy. Don't want it. Yeah, I didn't go into it to do conflict resolution. Unfortunately, when couples, by the time they get to you, they've already pretty much decided they're done. And so, but there's lots of people who have gifts for that. I'm just not one of them. So I knew individual was another thing I like. Now, group therapy, that's different. Love that. So that was part of it, just observing myself. What do I like? What am I drawn to? What's easy when I wake up in that morning and I have a list of clients? Which ones am I looking forward to? Like, this one is so interesting, versus the one that's more difficult, which might be, those who are more personality disordered. Those are ones, again, not my gift. The other thing is, as I grew in my practice, not necessarily trying to get more Black women, but I think for Black people in general, they want to go to someone who looks like them and they feel who understands them. And I developed a practice really with a lot of Black single women, some married as well. I also have men as well as that. And then the issues of racial trauma became first and foremost too of interest. I know I've been talking for you for a minute, but I just also want to connect my background, which was I was around, I've grown up with a lot of predominantly white spaces. So my own quest to know myself and my culture also connects to my desire to help others, clients of color, understand that too.
Yeah, I like that. So in our pre-call, you had mentioned some of the challenges your population faced, and one of the challenges you mentioned was selecting a mate. So your client typically is a successful woman,
Yeah.
and she's trying to find a mate that is either equally yoked or somebody who can relate to them. So kind of explain what those clients are going through, and maybe do you have a solution to that issue, because it's a big thing on social media now, because
Mhm.
everybody kind of wants to be loved.
Oh gosh, yes. And I wish I did have a clear-cut solution. I'd probably be a billionaire if I because there's so many people struggling with this,
Yes.
and particularly single women in a city like Atlanta, where the ratio of women to men is very large. You have successful women who do desire partnership. They get looked down upon, honestly,
Mhm.
for the struggles that they feel. The women, I've had women who experience depression because they can't find that. And the other thing is this, years are going by, every year it's realizing the dream that I want, family, children, it's going to disappear. Like I'm not going to have it. And then there's this struggle of like, well, do I want to just have the children and not have the spouse? But no, I really want to do it the way that others do it. I want the spouse and I want the kids. So there's that conflict there, that inner battle of, well, maybe I should just have a child or should I adopt? I'm getting to my 40s now. I can't maybe have children anymore. And so there's grieving the loss of that. There's so many emotional pieces to it. And so what I suggest when I work with women often is to, obviously we have to process all of that, but also to challenge this belief that it will never happen. Challenge the belief also that, so what happens is you have a lot of these single women who in the workspace, they have to show up large and in charge. That doesn't always translate to the relationship space. And so they're wanting they're wanting it all to be in the way that they think it should be versus understanding. And I'm speaking of primarily because that's who my demographic is, heterosexual women, women desiring men. And they are really wanting it the way that they want it. And sometimes it's just recognizing you're not going to get everything. So we talk about the 80/20,
Mhm.
and we talk about, yeah, you control in this space, but in this space, it's not about control. It's not about being right. It's about like, this is your best friend. This is someone you is different than you. Men and women are different.
Mhm.
Don't expect a man to act like a woman.
Correct.
So we have to just challenge a lot of these beliefs and ideas about what they thought it was going to be. And honestly, it's helped. It's helped a lot of women. So I love it. I love helping that because particularly this area of the is there something wrong with me?
Mm.
That's the part I like to challenge. Been through relationship after relationship, and is it me? Am I the problem? No. Um, this hasn't person for you hasn't appeared yet. So just take it as a learning lesson.
Now, what about specifically about the income disparity? So, by default, if you're working with a high level professional woman, the man of her income level is very slim. There's already fewer men in the Atlanta metro area. So, how do you advise on either do you date somebody who has less income? Do you have to deal with the compromising of somebody with higher income? Like, how do you think about that?
I've had to have discussions with clients around um, the value they put on that,
Mhm.
and that you, particularly as you get older, uh, you're going to want someone there. I mean, honestly, you're going to want someone there who's going to bring you chicken soup when you're sick, like
Yeah.
whether they're making a $200,000 a year or $50,000 a year. So essentially the priorities shift as things
Mm.
go on. But there are some women who are like, nope, just this is what I want. I want this $200,000 a year king to come in and sweep me off my feet. And they're not going to step away from that. So I'm like, okay, if that's the case, then that's fine. But understand that you may have to broaden what you're looking for.
Mhm.
Again, I'll speak for Black women. Often we want that person to be a Black man. And Black men have a lot of challenges around, well, and we could do another whole podcast on that. Opportunities. Black women often are seen as the easier minority, than a Black man. And so there's reasons why there's the income disparities, just more difficult and more challenging. So you might have to broaden what you're looking for if that's what you want. But if you want a Black male partner, you have to understand culture. You have to understand issues of racism. You have to understand that the money piece isn't the most important piece. It's really, will they bring you chicken soup when you're sick?
I like that a lot. And to your point that you mentioned, I was talking to somebody. I was like, one of my goals this year is to come off more friendly. And because when you're different spaces with different cultures, you can become off more aggressive. And I think one of the things you talk about is microaggressions in the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
And what I just described, a shift I have to make, a consciousness I have to have when I move in different spaces cooperatively. Um, how do you advise clients deal with those microaggressions? Because it can weigh on you year after year, opportunity missed after opportunity missed.
It's so true. So the psychological aspects of that are uh, we have issues with high blood pressure. We have issues with, um, just the stress of managing all of that.
Mhm.
Heart issues. We may use substances to cope, like alcohol and drugs that are not healthy and don't help. It is, as I mentioned before, something that you're going to see everywhere. I think the most important thing is recognizing that it's real,
Yes.
that you're not, you know, one of the things I'll find and see in clients is like, well, maybe it was just this, or maybe it's that, and that takes so much psychological energy, which causes the stress response and the cortisol, which causes the other health issues. Um, so let them know, no, you're not crazy. This was a racial microaggression, and it's real, and it is exhausting because of the fact that you're working in a system, depending on where you work, whether they're open to issues of diversity or not. So you have to be proactive and intentional about managing your stress. So it might be like allies that you find in the space that you can talk to. Some organizations have affinity groups where they bring people of color together to be able to talk and provide support. It's so important. You might need to come to therapy to manage and deal with that as well. And you may want to take the charge and take the lead. Not that this is easy to do, but to initiate some types of support in the workplace so that people don't feel isolated and they don't feel alone. Again, because it's systemic and it's like, I don't know, climbing Mount Everest to recognize that there's going to be a change. You don't want to, am I trying to say, think that this is just going to go away because it's not.
I think that is a tough part, that knowing change isn't going to come fast, if at all. I think
Mhm.
that's a big challenge. But I think it's a great segue into another part of your business, which is kind of coaching organizations, being that person to say, hey, that's not right. These are the behaviors that are causing the frustrations with your workforce. Can you speak on that work, and how have you helped organizations?
Well, most of what I do really is focusing on mental health clinicians
Mm,
and doing workshops, helping them understand issues of race and diversity in the work. I have done some with organizations where I go in and talk to them about issues of just basic stuff like just what is race, what is racism, what is systemic racism, areas of cultural humility, and how to implement that into the workplace. What I find is that that type of work is, again, it's difficult, it's challenging. It can, for some, be just like, for lack of a better word, just take all the life out of you. And I'll just be specific because of the fact that you have people of color, people who have experienced oppression, and then you have the privilege of white people who often are well-meaning and want to understand and learn, but they're still cloaked in this idea of whiteness and the privilege of whiteness.
mhm.
So well-meaning, but might make a statement or comment that just is like, oh, we thought we were there. We thought we had made some progress, and it's like we're 3 steps back. And and understand the climate that we're dealing with now, where areas of diversity are being taken out of businesses. They're being taken out of academia. You can't even say diversity in some places. You can't say social justice. So I do enjoy helping people to learn about areas of race and racism, particularly those who have never really understood. I did a workshop on Black women and their hair and its relationship to racial identity and self-esteem. Had many white people in the workshop. And as I'm sharing and talking about issues of because I always go into the history,
Mm.
slavery. The first thing that they did with the Africans coming over was shave their hair. That was the first moment of humiliation. And so that's why, and when you look back at the culture, African culture, you look at the hairstyles, they're just absolutely beautiful. They're like works of art. Versus you look at the pictures of slavery and you have the women who have the scarves on their hair or the hair. And there's this idea that somehow our hair isn't beautiful when it is. So I'm talking about these things and I get comments in the chat because it's a Zoom workshop. Like, I had no idea.
Mhm.
Who knew this was going on? I wish I had known more. So I love to be able to open people's thoughts and ideas about even something that you think is small as hair, but has so much meaning, particularly for Black women, but I think for Black people in general in our culture. So, so I do enjoy really the main part would be teaching people who this is totally new to them. And it's not just white people, it can be people of color as well.
Yeah, I see that. And from my angle, it's like it's hard for somebody to see their own privilege, but
Hmm.
it's also hard to tell somebody to relinquish their privilege for
Oh, yeah.
equity purposes.
Hmm.
Speak on that as far as like, I think sometimes we say, hey, be fair, but we all want those we're associated with their own benefits. So we want our children to have the best opportunity. Why forego those opportunities to help another population that we have no affinity to at all? So kind of speak to that dynamic of privilege and what somebody has to give up for, for I guess righteousness sake at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so that's what I would push back on to them, like you're giving up something.
Mhm.
When you think of racism, there's a good book, Heather McGhee, The Sum of Us, and she talks about the costs of racism to white people. She uses the imagery of the swimming pool back in the 50s and how when they integrated the pools, white people would leave. And so here's this beautiful community pool that they can no longer have access to. So I would say that there are costs to this system of racism to everybody. And so when white people may be looking at what am I losing, I would say, oh, but what are you gaining?
Mm,
Rather than the other frame. White privilege, and particularly for white people maybe working on anti-racism, there is a lot of shame
yeah.
that's connected with a lot of guilt, and it's difficult to tolerate those feelings. And so they just don't. They don't have race conversations or discussions because it's uncomfortable. And it's uncomfortable for everybody. But I also think that for people of color, it can also be very validating. I'm seen for the very first time. And so I don't think it is that you're losing something. It's so much work to do around that
Mm,
so that people can see. One of the things, also, I think she talks about how white people think that, oh, I'm just living in this neighborhood and not recognizing that they're actually segregating
yeah.
when they go into their white neighborhoods, like, and can kind of have their nice little cozy space. And I don't have to think about these, messy things like race and how it's hurt people. And I can still be a good person.
Yeah.
And so I think making people aware of that, there's this like, whoa, haha, I didn't even really get it. As I said before, that's what I enjoy doing is teaching that. So I think that you're working through emotions and you're working through obviously history and you're working through comfort levels that people just don't want to feel uncomfortable.
So, what is next for you and your firm? What do you think you're going to be working on in the future? What would you like to work on? What aspirations do you have?
That is a great question because I'm really in a point now sort of pondering that as I get to the latter end of my career. And I believe that the training, as I mentioned before, I have a business coach,
Oh,
and we were talking the other day, and she asked me, "Have you thought about coaching? Coaching in the areas of diversity?" And so that's something I'm thinking about as I get maybe move away from the clinical, potentially doing coaching. But right now, the focus is on doing trainings. And so in trainings, one of the areas that I am focusing on is how do you address racism when it shows up in the therapy room? What do
mm,
you do as a practitioner when your client makes a racist statement? Of course, from a point of view of a clinician of color versus a white clinician, it'll be very different. But talking about that, as I mentioned before, my hair presentation, I want to revive that and bring that back in. And me and my colleague, Anna Trad, who is also a psychologist,
mhm,
we are working on also developing workshops for clinicians of color where there is a space where you, as you mentioned before, can talk about sort of the burden and the exhaustion that comes when you're in organizations or quite frankly, sometimes working with white clients who might put you in a space of, you know, feeling less than because of their privilege.
mhm.
So those are the areas that I'm working on thinking about and excited about, honestly.
Very good. So this is an episode on building wealth and mental health. Do you have any advice? Let's say you're talking to yourself, just getting out of your doctoral program. Any financial advice that you would give your younger self? Look out for this. Please do this. Something that you did or you should have done.
I would give my younger self the advice of, and this is hopefully connected to the money piece, but listening more to those older than me.
Mm,
Um, when you're younger, you think you kind of got it all together, and but the people who have gone before you, there's so much wisdom there that they have, even though you have to go through it often and you have to learn yourself, and they can share and show you what they did and didn't do. So that's one thing I would do. In terms of building wealth, I would save more. My father always told me, pay yourself first.
mm,
I never did that. Um, I would what's the fun thing that I want to do, or what do I want to buy? Now, that being said, I never liked being in debt, so I would always manage that, but I would never think about like what can I do to put myself in place so I can have more savings. Investments, I never understood them. Maybe I need to talk to you, Randall, after this, but but the stock market, like I don't get the stock. I don't, I'm in TIA Cref. I get the little portfolio they send you. I just throw it away. I have no idea what they're talking about. So I would tell myself, stop and learn this. Like investigate. Well, what is this? And what's a stock and what's a bond? And what's you know, this particular thing in that they do versus this other one in terms of one is for like you probably could tell me more than me, but you can see I don't know what I'm talking about. So I would tell myself that for sure.
Mhm.
Talk to people who know what they're doing
Yeah.
and then who can get you on the right track in terms of your money piece. I did honestly have a brother who's older. He's also has a PhD in electrical engineering. He's at the Florida A&M University and works there. He does do all that. So again, I was blessed with that. And he told me to put, when I was younger, 100% stock, just put it in stock.
Smart.
And I did. And I did honestly pretty well. Now he's saying, okay, you're getting older, come out of the stock, do other things. And doing that. But I didn't pay attention to it. I just, okay, the money's going into that. Pay attention to it. Absolutely. The other thing is maybe like-minded people who are honestly, I would tell myself, find other folks who are growing and investing or maybe buying property. I
Mhm.
would connect with them more. Most of my friends are like me. They're educators, they're helpers. Money is not on the forefront of my mind. So I would definitely maybe get more friends who were doing that sort of thing. It's tough now. I have two bonus children. They're in their, one's about to be 30, one's in their 20s, and they tell me it's just hard out
Yes.
there now. To try to buy a home. Back when I was coming up, wasn't easy, but it was doable.
Mhm.
So if you're able to invest in property, I would have told myself, do it earlier than what I did. Those types of things. So I'm sure there's more, but
I think that's good advice. I think the thing that resonated with me with is you don't have to know everything. And if you have family members that you trust, lean on them. They're more than happy to provide that advice. If you don't, definitely reach out to an expert, shameless plug. But lean to who people around you and try to get people around you who are doing the things that you want to do, because that does kind of rub off on you by osmosis. So that's really good. And last thing, if you have a T account that you haven't looked at in 10 years, please have somebody else look at it. I'm glad your brother was there because I have seen some certain things historically with T accounts that could hurt you a lot. So I really appreciate you sharing those things. So, like I said, thank you very much, Dr. Rivers. This is another episode of Building Wealth and Mental Health. You've been excellent. You've shared a lot of nuggets that I think a lot of people are going to use, especially if they're going out and practice. So, thank you very much for coming on.
thanks for having me. I hope I was able to give you some good information, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Thank you.
Let's go, Uncle Money.